We're going to be talking about Azure today. What's your favorite color, baby? Hey guys, and welcome to the show. Today marks an important milestone for Taste of Premier. This is our first international show. So Chris, welcome to the Taste of Premier family.
Thank you very much, Lex. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, Chris is actually in England. I think he's in London right now, correct?
I'm in what we refer to as the Big Smoke, yes, which is our capital city. So normally I'm a northerner, and I live up in the beautiful side of the country up north. But this week I'm down at a customer, so yes, I'm in London.
Ah, yeah, lots of sheep and Land Rovers.
Indeed, yes, not far from the Lake District. So if you know where the Lake District is, yeah.
No, man. So I've been to Reading. There's a huge Microsoft site in Reading, and I'm afraid to say this, but a long time ago I went and trained our English support engineers on Windows 95, and
Reading's probably changed a lot since then. Yeah, it's probably a much different place now. For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Stayed in the Copid Beach, which was the thing I remember most about that hotel is that they had like outdoor skiing on grass, which was pretty funny.
Okay. Yeah, sounds right for Reading, that, yeah.
Yeah, pretty cool. But anyway, you're going to talk to us about Azure today.
I am indeed. Azure Multi-Factor Authentication, which is part of the Azure offering. So I've got a bit to talk around about Azure and the MFA product, and then maybe do a bit of a demo as well and show you how it works in action.
Okay, so for anybody that's watching this that's not familiar with multi-factor identification or multi-factor authentication, it's you may not be familiar with the term, but you're probably familiar with the product, right? And what I mean by that is that passwords are a single point authentication mechanism, and so multi-factor just essentially means that there are two ways for us to identify you. That can be a password in a smart card or a password in biometrics, etc. And so it's exciting that we're doing that with Azure. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so it's exactly right, Lex. So we add extra assurance around the authentication that you provide. Yeah. So usually, and everyone's familiar with username and password, and we use that every day for accessing corporate web systems as well as and corporate systems as well as external sort of personal systems. So you would use it for online banking or those sorts of things as well. Where the multi-factor authentication piece steps in is to provide extra assurance around that first authentication to that web property. So we can do that using different techniques. So you mentioned a few of them there. So smart card and PIN as an example. So something you have being a smart card and something you know being the PIN. We can also use biometrics as well. So as an example with Windows 10 now, we've got Windows Passport and Hello, and we can use biometrics there for that as well, right? So we've got fingerprint or iris scan or facial recognition that we can use there. So that's something you are. So they're the sort of different types of authentication we can have. But essentially, usernames and passwords aren't really super secure, as we know, because they can get leaked in breaches, as we see many of those happening on a daily basis, as it seems now with properties being breached on the internet and these usernames and passwords being leaked out. So they're also not very, very strong either easy to guess, easy to brute force, etc. So what we want to do is strengthen the authentication and which adds security to accessing internal systems, and we can do that through the Azure platform as well, using the Azure MFA offering that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Windows Hello. I think that's the coolest thing.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
It does a great job. And it's awesome to just be able to look over at my laptop and have it automatically sign me in. I mean, there's a convenience factor there. And to be honest with you, I think most people think that that's why we did it, for convenience. They don't realize that it's much more secure, infinitely more secure than, writing your password down somewhere or sticking it in a drawer or, sharing it with somebody. Can't do any of that with your face.
No, and that's the thing. It's finding that delicate balance, right, between adding security but not making it so unusable that users will be resistant to it. And that's and that's what I think we've managed to do with Passport and Hello built into Windows 10. But also on hopefully, as you'll see through the demo, with Azure Multi-Factor Authentication, it's also really simple and easy to set up and use as well. So having that convenience factor as well as added security is always a bonus, right?
Awesome. Yeah. So let's take a look.
Okay, so as I mentioned, I've got a few slides to go through to show you here. So first off, I'd like to give you a bit of an overview of MFA and just talk about what it is. We've already mentioned some of this already, but I'll dig into the slides and we can flesh that out a bit more now. So multi-factor authentication, as you quite rightly said, Lex, it's a method of authentication that requires the use of one or more verification, of more than one verification method. Something such as a password or a PIN number, so something that's in your head essentially. Something you have, a phone, which we use for Azure Multi-Factor Authentication. Smart cards are quite common. Certificates as well with the associated private keys, or some other hardware tokens. So people might be familiar with like the little hardware dongles you can get with the one-time passwords on them. They also form multi-factor authentication. Also something you are as well. So we mentioned this with Windows 10, a fingerprint or retinal scan or other biometric, and that's what we have with Passport and Hello built into Windows 10 now as well.
Awesome.
So you can see some of those tokens there that we mentioned as well, and I will just go on to this next slide. So what is Azure Multi-Factor Authentication? So it's basically a product that Microsoft acquired back in 2012 called Phone Factor, and now we've integrated that fully into our Azure Active Directory offering, and we can protect access to both on-premises and cloud applications as well. And it's important to note that we don't only work with cloud applications, so SaaS applications like Office 365, but we can also, if licensed correctly, use it with on-premises applications such as VPN maybe, or other types of on-premises products as well. And I can talk a bit about that after.
Okay.
So some concepts then around multi-factor authentication. So one of those is strong authentication, and we mentioned this already. So we provide a higher level of security than just standard authentication of the username and password. So we provide an additional factor for the authentication. So as an example, we've got the multi-factor authentication phone app we can use. Maybe it's a phone call to the phone as well, or maybe we use a biometric, as we mentioned with Windows 10. Another concept is what we call step-up authentication. So in this scenario where we might use this is we access a resource and we authenticate to that resource using our standard username and password. And then if we access another resource which is deemed to be a higher security value or higher value resource, then we might be asked to sort of step up and proof up, such as at that point providing a multi-factor authentication login to that resource. And this is a way we can essentially guard our high value resources by providing that extra authentication level as and when we need it as well. And then there's something what we call contextual authentication, and this is basically a way we can analyze different criteria around a user's authentication and then provide or enforce multi-factor authentication depending on certain scenarios. So as an example, you might be in the office, connecting from the office. So from that point of view, we would say, well, do you know what, we don't need to provide multi-factor authentication to access a resource in this instance. Or you might be coming from an untrusted or unknown network, let's say. So if that happens, then we might say, well, actually, you're coming from this unknown network, so we want you to prove that you are who you say you are more robustly by providing multi-factor authentication at that time. So we can provide that contextual or authentication depending on some of those criteria as well.
Yeah, so this is cool, and I just wanted to mention something that you might have later on in your slides, but when you're talking about multi-factor authentication in devices, we do this here at Microsoft, and I've got actually an iPhone and a Windows phone. But on my iPhone, I've got a multi-factor authentication app, and I can actually just use a biometric to confirm authentication on my phone, which is actually kind of nice.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. So in that instance, you're using two factors. One of the factors is the phone itself. So that's
right.
something you have, right? So your phone is registered with the multi-factor authentication service, and it's being pinged essentially to verify the authentication. But to authenticate to the phone and verify that that's a valid authentication that's come through, you will use your biometric. So you do that on iPhones with your fingerprint. On Windows Phone, unfortunately, we haven't quite got there with that, but we can
that's
provide
a hardware thing, though. That's not because
it is indeed. Yeah, it is indeed. So it's a hardware thing, but we can provide a PIN number as a secondary factor. So in that instance, it'll be something you have and something in that instance.
I think the authentication app runs on iOS, Android, and Windows Phone, correct?
It does indeed, yeah. It runs on all platforms. There's no reason not to use it, essentially. And we'll talk a little bit about how it's licensed as well, which a lot of people might not realize that they're actually currently licensed to use it, because there's different ways we can enable multi-factor authentication or use this service, and I'll talk about this in a little while as well, which essentially if you're already licensed for it and it's part of your SKUs essentially, and you've got an iOS or an Android or a Windows Phone device, you can just go and use it. So it's pretty cool to set it up and use.
Yeah, awesome.
Okay, let's talk a little bit now about why you might use Azure Multi-Factor Authentication. So it's really easy to use, simple to set up, and for users to manage their own devices, and hopefully I can demonstrate that to you and how simple it is. It's scalable, as it leverages the cloud, obviously, so we can scale with that. It's always protected, so we provide authentication using the highest industry standards, and it's reliable as well, so it's backed by Microsoft's SLA, which we back all our cloud services with as well.
Yeah. Cool.
So convenience, again, we've sort of mentioned this, but there's no devices or certificates to purchase, provision or maintain. So that's always a bonus when you don't have to buy extra hardware devices or smart cards or things like that. We can just use a user's phone. No user training required. There might be a little bit of hand-holding to talk users through it, but it is very, very simple to set up, so there should be minimal training requirements for users. If it's a personal device that the user is using, then they're obviously liable to replace their lost or broken phones, or if it's a company device, obviously you would replace it via that process there. Users can manage their own authentication methods and phone numbers as well. So we allow users to use different types of authentication methods with their phone, and I'll talk through this in a little while as well. Depending on what you configure in the portal, you can say that a user can essentially use any of those things, and then the user can pick which ones they want to use. And it integrates with the existing directory for centralized user management and enrollment as well. So we can obviously use Azure Active Directory and integrate with on-premises Active Directory.
Cool.
Scalable as well. So I mentioned this already. So works with all leading on-premises applications. So if you do want to deploy it on-prem, we can integrate with things like Cisco VPN, Citrix NetScalers, Juniper devices, any of those things. So that's quite nice to know, and it's a good upselling point for it as well. We can support ADFS, integrate with ADFS. So if you're using ADFS for authenticating or providing authentication for cloud applications or on-premises applications, which are sort of SAML-based or claims-aware applications that are integrated with ADFS, we can leverage multi-factor authentication there. built into Microsoft Azure Active Directory for use with cloud apps, so it sort of works right out of the box with Azure AD, or we can install the on-premises one as well. There is an SDK, so if you did have custom applications and you wanted to integrate custom apps directly with the service, then you can do that. And of course, sort of reliable, scalable, etc., as we've mentioned already. And then security, so we're obviously providing strong multi-factor authentication. Real-time fraud alerts, this is quite nice. So what we can do, depending on how the user, which authentication methods the user is configured, we can, the user can provide a fraud alert. So let's say all of a sudden the user gets an authentication request on their phone on the authentication app, and it's not for a sign-in that the user has actually performed. Well, obviously that's probably a potential fraud there where somebody's trying to log into that user's account. So straight from the application, the user can report that fraud, and then of course we can we can collect those fraud alerts centrally and alert administrators off the back of that. So it provides that real-time sort of alerting capability to let administrators know if somebody's trying to hack somebody's account. There is a PIN option we can use. The PIN option is only for the on-premises version, so we need to have the on-prem MFA server installed. But if we have, then we can specify PINs as well. So that might be a PIN. If you receive the phone call, you can enter a PIN that way via a text message or through the application as well. Obviously, very robust reporting and logging features are in there. And it enables compliance as well. So you might have industry compliances or regulations that you need to meet, and obviously providing multi-factor authentication will help you meet those compliances as well.
So you may not know the answer to this, and if not, that's okay. Do you know if there's a list of compliance rankings and standards that we support?
So it would be more. It would be a little bit different than that, I suppose. So each of the compliance standards would mandate the use of strong authentication, let's say. So in PSI as an example, PCI, sorry, it might, as part of the compliance, and I'm not sure of the exact specifics of it, but one of the control mechanisms or the controls in there would be, users must be using strong authentication to access this type of data, or if it's HIPAA, which is obviously an American standard for the healthcare records, right?
Right.
Again, if you're accessing particular types of information which are conformant to the HIPAA standard, then you must use strong authentication. So that's where we would link in with that. It wouldn't necessarily be that there's a list of standards which this provides as such. It would be more that we can help you meet those regulatory requirements by enforcing strong authentication with this particular service. I hope that sort of answers the question there.
Yeah. So in the U.S. we have other standards, right? FedRAM is one of them, et cetera. That's what I was kind of looking for, but you answered the question. I appreciate it. I was just wondering if there was like a website or something somewhere that had everything that we were certified against, every government certification and every... Yeah,
sure. Yeah. So we have sort of got that from the Azure Trust Center. So what you can see is all of our cloud services, whether it's Office 365 or Azure or any of those things, we have got a website which details how each of our different offerings meets these different standards. So as an example, infrastructure as a service on Azure will meet or is conformant to XYZ standards, and there's a whole list of those. And in the UK, we've got particular standards that we meet as well. And Office 365, is conformant to those. So multi-factor authentication is sort of one piece of those, which can help you meet your requirements, and whichever requirements you've got to meet, it's a way we can do that.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I was looking for. Trust Center.
Azure Trust Center, yes. So you can find that. I think it's linked directly off the Azure front page, and all of our compliances and all of those things are there. And of course, we get audited as well for these things, right? So all of our data centers are audited and by third-party independent companies, and they will come in and make sure that we are doing what we say we are doing. So FedRAMP or HIPAA or PCI, etc. And we get those auditors to come in and verify that. So we have got quite a strong story there, I would say, in terms of how we can help companies meet those requirements and compliances.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Okay, so let's look quickly how it works and how it all fits together. So a user will sign in from a device using a username and password. And in this scenario here, they're connecting to an on-premises application. That on-premises application will talk to the multi-factor authentication server, which is installed on premises too, and the application will talk to MFA using Radius, which is a standard protocol, remote access dial-in user service, I think it stands for, but don't hold me to that.
Yeah, Radius has been around for a long time.
Yeah, it has. It's quite an old protocol. LDAP as well. We can use lightweight directory access protocol as well. We can even have IIS, so Microsoft's web server, talk directly to the MFA server. There's a way we can use informants-based authentication, or it's a couple of different ways we can integrate that, or even remote desktop services as well. So remote desktop services can talk to the MFA server. So essentially, the user puts their username and password in on the application. So let's say it's a VPN. The VPN will then talk to the MFA server on premises and then go out to the cloud service. So it's still the cloud service that will ping the user essentially for that second factor. So whether it's phone call or text or application, the user will then answer that authentication request. That gets sent back to the cloud service. The cloud service then talks back to the on-prem server. The on-prem server back to the application, says, yep, the user's golden, they've authenticated, and then, of course, they're allowed access. In addition to that, we can have cloud applications. So cloud applications could be SaaS applications, whether they're Microsoft or whether they're third-party SaaS applications, and they can talk to let's say, authenticate via an on-premises ADFS instance. And if that ADFS instance is integrated with MFA, the same process happens there, whereby the ADFS server pings the MFA server, that goes off to the cloud service, and so on and so forth. Or the cloud application could be integrated directly with Azure AD as well. So if you don't want to use any on-premises infrastructure, you just want to be in a cloud-only world. So let's say you're using Office 365 and you're not using ADFS, you're just hooking directly into Azure AD, then of course we can use MFA there, and Azure AD is fully integrated with the MFA server in that instance as well.
Yeah. Cool.
And then lastly, there is an SDK, as I mentioned as well. So if you wanted to integrate your apps directly with the service, then you can do that as well.
Okay.
So we've sort of talked about this already, but we've got the three different authentication options that we can use as well. So you alluded to it already, Lex, about the mobile apps, and we support iOS and Android and Windows Phone there. And the application, we can use two different methods essentially. We can use one-time password mode, or we can use the mode where it sends a notification to the phone, and then the app will pop up with a notification. So there's two modes we can use there. Phone calls as well, so obviously that's where we dial the user's phone, and then there will be a recorded message which plays back, and then the user can accept or verify that authentication. So they can, normally it's the hash key, so, well, as you guys call it, the pound key, press the hash key on the phone, and that will say, yes, that's a valid authentication. If you're using the on-premises server, then we can use a PIN number there as well to add extra security. And then text messages. So text messages, it's worth talking about because there's been some recent guidance that's been released by NIST, which is the American National Institute for Standards and Technology. And they've actually released some guidance to say that it's not very secure to use text messages as an authentication method. So we do support it and you can enable it, but it's probably not recommended to use it because of that very reason. Because essentially it's easy for somebody to spoof a phone number and then take or receive somebody's text messages. So what we would advocate is that you use the mobile app as the sort of best method, but of course you need a smartphone to do that. But I don't know anybody that doesn't have a smartphone nowadays,
right.
But that's just worth mentioning there. So phone calls or mobile apps is the way to go. Mobile apps preferably. Text messages you can still use, but it's been recommended by NIST not to use those. But of course, it's up to the customer which one they want to use there.
Yeah.
So I've mentioned these three already. So the mobile app, it's just a couple of points to mention there. So the notification mode, as I said, this is where the MFA server will push a notification to the application, and then the user can authenticate, deny, or deny and report it as well. So I mentioned the fraud alerting already, and one-time password mode is the other mode as well. So we use the oath standard for that. So that's where you get a code which rotates every 60 seconds, and then the application will have a form where you would put that in. So users are generally used to that method if they use other hardware-based tokens which print out whether it's a 6 or 8 digit number that they have to enter into the application. Okay, so which one should you use? I sort of mentioned this already. So pros of a phone call: there's no data connection, so essentially it's just a phone call into the user, so there's no data usage there. Cons, though, we recommend and we sort of push the fact that you should be using PIN, and there's no SLA either from a carrier perspective. So maybe you're out of service, or maybe the phone call doesn't get connected, and then if you're in a situation where you need to access an application and that doesn't come through, then of course you're not going to be very happy if you can't connect to the application because your MFA's not coming through. Text messages, again, no data connection or smartphone needed. You can use an older phone. It is what we'd class as the worst user experience, and I sort of mentioned about the NIST guidance as well. And again, there's no SLA from the carrier perspective. So the one we recommend, and which I think everybody does use, is the application on the smartphone. The con there, obviously, is that you need a smartphone to use it. But as I mentioned, I'm not sure I know anybody that hasn't got a smartphone nowadays.
Yeah,
and it is the best.
Everybody does. The only con for me is my battery's dead.
So this is, you can register more than one application as well. So I've got a personal phone and a work phone as an example, which Microsoft issued to me. So I got the app on both of those essentially. So if one of them's dead, I can get the authentication on the other phone that way. And of course, you can always fall back as well. So this is quite nice. It's worth mentioning. If the user's got more than one method registered, so that let's say they've got a phone number as well as the application, and the phone's not got a data connection or whatever, you can't use the application, you can actually fall back to using the phone. And there's a way that you can do that in most of the user interfaces there to fall back that way. So if you use an ADFS as an example, there's a little link you can click to say please use my phone instead of my application.
Oh, that's really cool. You know what? I said that as kind of a joke, but I didn't realize you could have more than one. That's awesome.
Yeah, so within the Microsoft deployment, we can certainly do that. Yeah.
Cool.
So I'll talk now a little bit about the available versions for Azure MFA as well. So I sort of mentioned this before, that you could already be licensed for this and not even know it through some of the different SKUs that you've already bought through Microsoft Cloud Services. So that might be a bonus for you if you didn't realize that, and you've actually got the ability to deploy it. So let's have a look at that then, those different offerings that we've got there. So we've got the standalone and on-premises versions of the service. So the standalone cloud version is where we can use SaaS applications in the cloud, as I mentioned already, to connect to the MFA cloud MFA instance, or you can deploy the on-premises version. Now, you would need to pay for that, and you can pay for it on a per user or per device basis, and that's sort of charged as part of your Azure subscription. But if you've got Azure AD Premium, then you actually get licenses for the for MFA for all of the licensed users, and you also get license for the on-premises server as well. So there's a lot of organizations which might have Azure Active Directory Premium, either have bought that as a separate SKU, or maybe they've bought EMS, right? So with EMS, you get Azure AD Premium as part of EMS licenses. So it starts to stack up now when, customers may have bought this already and then not realize, well, actually, if I've got Azure AD Premium via, whichever license SKU that I've bought, well, I've actually got the ability to deploy the on-premises MFA server and integrate that with things like my VPN, or integrate it with things like my Citrix NetScalers or my remote access solution, or any of those things. And all you need to pay for is a server to host it on, and that's about it, really. So that's a really compelling thing there. I mean, obviously, if you're not licensed for Azure AD Premium, then you would have to pay using the sort of separate subscription model there. Also, for Azure administrators, so all of your if you've got an Azure AD, an Azure subscription, and Azure AD in the cloud, and you've got your global administrator and subscription admins and all of those guys, well, actually, you get the cloud instance of MFA free for those, and that's a push that we did basically because we wanted to make sure that when accessing our cloud services using those privileged credentials, that you could use the higher security there, as we mentioned already. So for those privileged users, you don't have to pay for the MFA. You get it as part of buying the other cloud services essentially and having a subscription there. And then also for Office 365. So if you've bought Office 365, you get a subset of the MFA functionality included in Office 365 licenses, which is quite nice as well. It's worth noting, and I've got a table which sort of breaks this down, that the free for administrators and Office 365 versions don't give you all of the bells and whistles as you might expect. So it doesn't give you the on-premises server or any of those things.
Awesome.
Skip on a bit farther. So MFA for Office 365, I mentioned that already, works exclusively with Office 365 apps. So that's SharePoint Online, Exchange Online, all of those things. And you manage it from the Office 365 portal as well. So that's important to know. MFA for Azure admins. So you get the same subset of capabilities to the admins at no cost. And every administrative account in a subscription can be MFA enabled. So if you're not using all of the other MFA capabilities, at least for your admins, you should enable this as part of the course, really, because if you can compromise those privileged cloud identities, then it could be a bad day for you, right? If you can do that. So we need to make sure that accessing these cloud services at an administrative level is secured. And then, of course, the full MFA offering, which is the richest experience with all of the capabilities, and it becomes as part of Azure AD Premium, or we can license it on those different licensing, per user or per device model that I talked about as well.
Cool.
And then lastly, just to sort of break that down, it's a bit of a busy slide, but it sort of gives you a feel for the different features that you might get. So obviously I mentioned on the very right-hand side there, you get with the full MFA offering, which you get through EMS, which is now not Enterprise Mobility Suite. We've renamed that to Enterprise Mobility Plus Security, so the slide's a little bit dated there. But essentially, you get all of the extra pieces that we mentioned. So fraud alerts, MFA reports, one-time bypasses, custom greetings, your trusted IPs. There's a whole host of features that you can get by going for the the Ferrari model, if you will. But for free. For MFA admins, you do get support to use mobile app, phone call, or SMS as a second factor, and of course we get that with Office 365 as well. Excellent. So that's all the slides that I wanted to go through. So maybe we can do a quick demo now, and I can show you some of the functionality. I've got a cloud-enabled user within my tenant, and I can show you, hopefully, how easy it is to set it up and then use it to log in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so here we have the classic Azure portal. So we can manage MFA through this classic portal here. It's worth noting that we have added Azure Active Directory support into the new portal, but it's still in preview at the minute, so we've not got quite all of the features there. So some of the things we still need to do from the classic portal, but I'm sure it won't be long before we get all of that wrapped up into the new portal. So from the classic portal here, we can go to users. And this is just my sort of test tenant that I've got set up. I've got a couple of users here, MFA test and MFA test 2. So I've already set up MFA for this first user, but I haven't for this second user. And as you can see here, you can see that the cloud-only users, it's easier just for me to go through and show you how to set it up with the cloud-only. So at the bottom here, you can see Manage Multi-Factor Authentication. So if I click that link, so as an administrator, I would do this, obviously.
Yeah.
When it wants to load up. Here we go. So I can just click this user here. I can do bulk updates, by the way, as well. So I can upload, I can enable MFA at scale, if you will, through the bulk upload there. We've also got some PowerShell commandlets we can use as well. So I just click Enable. I click Enable Multi-Factor Auth. You can see here that there's a link, aka.ms/MFA setup, so I can copy that and send that to the user, and then that will walk the user through the setup process. So I just click Enable Multi-Factor Authentication there and say that was successful. And then what I'm going to do is just start a in private session, so it doesn't use my existing cookies and authentication there. Go to the MFA setup process there. Once my email address, so I type in my email address for that user. So it was MFA test 2, and this is my tenant there. Okay, click continue. Enter the password for the user. So of course the user's already got an account in the cloud directory that would already be set up and know what the password is. Of course, you know, if it's the first time the user's actually using this at all, then they can set up all of the password at that point. Oops, sorry, wrong password. Try that one instead. There we go. So you can see here it says your admin has required that you set up this account for additional security verification, and then there's a link to set it up now. I've got no option to do anything else apart from sign out and sign in with a different user. So I click set it up now.
Yeah, and this is what the user would see.
Exactly. Yeah. So this would be the user setting this up. So within the management portal, I've not shown you this, but within the management portal, we've got the different options available to us here. So I can actually select at the management level to say, we don't want to allow the user to be able to use text message or authentication phone. We only want them to use app. So I can specify that at a management level if I want, and then it would force the user to do the mobile app. I've just left it at its defaults, which is allow the user to do everything essentially. But I'm going to set up the application now, and these are the two modes that I mentioned before, right? So receive notifications for verification or use verification code. So the verification code is the one-time rotating password, which is every 60 seconds changes, or the receive notification where it actually just pings your phone when it's ready for authentication. So I'll click set it up now. And then what it's going to do is it's going to give me a QR code on the screen. And then what you won't be able to see now is me using the Authenticator app on the phone. And I'm currently adding, and there's an add button on there, and it allows me to scan the QR code with the app, which it's now done. And then it's set all that up for me. So I can now use the application and then click finish, and it will just check the status of that. And hopefully, if all my ducks are in a row, then it'll be working just fine. Let's give it a second to check that status. There we go. So mobile app has been configured. Okay, so now that MFA is set up, we can click this button here to contact me and then verify that it's all working. And what we should see, hopefully, when it comes through, is you can see the application on my phone there. And it says verify, cancel, or cancel and report fraud. So they were the things that we mentioned before. So I click the verify button. And then it's all verified, and click close. And then hopefully on the screen there, you can see verification was successful. And then this is sort of what I mentioned before as well. So if we lose access to the mobile phone, specify a phone number in here. So I'm not going to put my personal phone number in there, but of course I could just put my number in, click next. And then also I could use that as a secondary factor in that instance as well. It's probably worth mentioning before we wrap up as well. So customers might be thinking about how Premier can help them on board to this service. So we do have a Premier offering, the POP service, which is one of our Operate programs, the POP Azure MFA service, and we can actually, a guy like me or one of my colleagues can come on to onto site through your Premier contract and help you set all this up, including setting up the on-premises server as well. So we can do that and help you out with that and integrate it with one of your applications on premises. So it's definitely worth considering that too.
Well, hey, Chris, man, that was awesome. I really enjoyed that. That was very, very informative.
Thank you very much for the time to come on and showcase it for you.
Yeah, no worries. And this actually is our first international show. We've had engineers that were not from the U.S. do deliveries, but this is the first time we've ever done one long distance from across the pond.
Oh, over the Atlantic, yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, thanks for doing this from the Big Smoke. And if you want to be a guest again, please, by all means, let me know. This was awesome. We really enjoyed it.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll speak again.
Yeah. So, guys, that's it for this week. So without further ado, that's your taste of Premier.